So we're looking at the possibility of empowerment through the lens of individuality and escapes from what we would call the mangrove, the sense of being trapped into the legacy of slavery and colonialism. Now, importantly, Condé faces these questions about identity and community through attention to individuality. And this quotation from her illustrates this point. The question that interests me is rather how to find one's place in the dominant world, how to maintain one's voice, how to be oneself in this world that asks you to conform. So the question of individualism and individual integrity is one that she is deeply concerned with as a literary artist. Importantly, though, the Caribbean women's lip that Condé responds to is situated within a context of West Indian literature and actually subverts its dominant discourse. Because selfhood and subjectivity in her texts is seen through unique individualistic voices that in themselves then comprise a multitude rather than the other way round. And the subject of selfhood is not constructed through opposition to another, in defiant opposition to a Western white other, unlike the negritude movement, which is built in opposition to colonial oppression as a way of aggressively seeking to legitimate a kind of an authentic black Caribbean selfhood. Crossing the Mangrove represents subjectivity as a process that's individual, and it's a process of self-examination. And in this process, the subject has to cross over from the confines, the limitations of small-minded prejudice, loneliness, and resentment, and navigate this metaphorical mangrove of the interconnectedness of the community to the light and the open horizon of truth and the possibility of happiness. Individuals in this book differ in their ability to actually use creative force to affirm themselves and life. And certain characters make efforts to reach self-understanding and to utilize creativity in imagining a brighter, better future. Women in particular affirm life by making promises to seek and increase self-knowledge and love. And it's no coincidence that the characters who make these efforts to affirm life speak in first-person narration. So even though there's no central hierarchy established in this sort of rhizomatic form of the novel, there's differences between characters, and that those differences are mainly highlighted through various forms of self-expression. So in this novel, Crossing the Mangrove is actually attempting to transcend circumstances, to go beyond the limitations defined for you by your circumstances, such as performing an act of writing or making a decision to attain knowledge. Several characters embark on a quest to learn about history, either of themselves, their families, the community, or the world. And crossing often involves leaving home, voyaging away from the traces of Rivière itself and Guadeloupe onto the highways of the wider world. Mira, for an example, resolves to wander as her lover Sancho had wandered across the world. And she dreams of crossing from mangrove to mangrove on a global scale, travelling from the familiar swamps of Guadeloupe to those encircling other Caribbean islands and onto the mangroves of the West African countries that Sancho once visited. And she's actually reversing the trajectory of slaves who crossed the Atlantic to the New World. Mira and Lucien have a very dream of crossing the ocean back to Africa. Unlike the ordeal that the Africans endured in chains, this is a journey about a subjective expression of freedom and a quest for knowledge and understanding. But Crossing the Mangrove doesn't have to be literalized in the realm of geography and space. It can be one that takes place within an ordeal of self-examination and actualization, bringing yourself into being. In this text, A subject is someone who has undergone a process of experiencing, acknowledge, reacting, and thinking according to an event that's taken place, the process of engaging with and responding to experience. And Sancho's arrival and brief life in Riviera Style can be understood as the event to which individuals in the community respond during the veillée. So it makes Sancho more than simply a stranger who happens upon the place and becomes the talk of the town. He becomes the catalyst for this process of experience, reaction, and reflection. He leaves this profound impact on the emotional landscape of the town, which is revealed by individuals who memorialize him. And it's those individuals who affirm his life and render his death a universal truth during the veillée who actually become the characters who do manage to begin the process of self-empowerment. Femininity is deeply important in this text to that process of empowerment, because it is really only female characters alongside Joby and Xanthippe that can affirm their individual I at the wake. And so those characters, including all the women, a child and a grieving exile, have been alienated in the dominant discourse of patriarchy, and this is important. The first-person narration in these characters reflects Condé's assertion in The Stealers of Fire that the words of women possess the power of anarchy and subversion. And by affirming themselves in first person and vowing to move beyond the pettiness and isolation of the community, they subvert the patriarchal discourse embodied by Lulu and Sylvestre. Mira, Dina, Dodos, and Rosa affirm themselves by speaking in first person, revealing past experiences, relationships, hopes for the future. And each of these women contemplates their relationship with Sancho in particular and reaches a decision about the future in light of those reflections. This Suzanne Crosser, a literary critic on Crossing the Mangrove, says that the women of Riviera Cell redefine their existence for themselves in terms of what they truly perceive to be happiness, and Sancho is the catalyst for that redefinition and perception. And it seems that before reflecting on the priorities and desires at his wake, many of these women aren't able to see the forest for the trees. They're unable to lift their head up and reconceptualize their lives. And the wake provides the opportunity to reflect on the events that have led to their present circumstances. And the perspective that they gain allows them to make promises to themselves and to their children to seek understanding and a better life. And the testimonies are really just maps, not of just the community and family, but also the paths that they intend to take in the future. So they're not depictions of them taking those paths, but rather the depictions of the processes of thinking that allow them to map out those paths that they hope to take in the future. Sancho is this catalyst, though, who inspires the self-reflection, because he exposes realities beneath the surface of individual characters' understanding. And he offers them truths during his time there. And after his death, these acquaintances have to work to decipher and understand them. So it's a process of interrogation that his death precipitates. Many individuals, after suffering alienation and discontent, come to terms with their own past and reflect on the present and think about ways to improve their lives. So in this way, Crossing a Mangrove, that is traveling across a sort of confusing border zone of identity, provides a powerful image of coming into selfhood, completing the beginning of the journey of self-expression. And the future in this journey remains unwritten and not really accessible to the reader. And so because of this, the novel's not really occupied with the ending, but with the process by which people understand their past and imagine the future. There's no true ending or resolution found in the novel, and the chapters aren't organized hierarchically and exist without any reference to an absolute center. So this is a process oriented kind of symbolism that the form of the novel embodies, that we're thinking about ways of thinking about ourselves, and that is what is being represented on the level of form. The female characters that embody this principle, particularly Dodo's Rosa and Dina, engage in this process of self-reflection and affirmation. And these women learn through their interactions with Sancho and use this new knowledge they acquire to think of a better future for themselves and their loved ones. Dodo's Pelagi faces her own questions at the wake and recalls her fateful meeting with Sancho on the Tres Saint Charles, the forest path that goes up to the mountains. A path that she describes as haunted by the ghosts of slaves. Importantly, these paths, as we'll come to see later on, have an enormous sort of symbolic connotation here, in that the traces are the paths that are often used historically by slaves, marooning slaves, which is rebelling slaves, trying to seek their freedom and escape the plantation, during which they would travel up to the top of the mountains. And it's obviously a path that leads to a sort of the perception of freedom. But in terms of the novel's metaphorical content and symbolism, these paths are a backwards-looking trajectory. And so seeking them out as the source of freedom inevitably involves being trapped within that history. Sancho greets her warmly and expresses concern for her son, Sonny, who's developmentally handicapped due to a brain hemorrhage. And Dodo's had blamed herself for her son's handicap, considering him as a kind of punishment from God for her infidelity to Emile. So when she's confronted with an offer of help from Sancho, a former doctor or curandero, Dodo's releases anger and frustration at him. But his death provides a contrast to the life that continues for her. And in the end, she promises to go to the end of the world to help her son. So Dodo's this reconceptualization and affirmation of life is about helping her son, Sonny. Dina, on the other hand, chooses to pursue happiness, light, and love beyond the confines of her sort of forested home. So even though she couldn't become a subject in relation to Sancho during his life, like being Sancho's wife, the mother of his child, she resolves to sort of begin on a voyage to become a subject in the full sense. And she is faithful to the truths that she affirms in light of his presence in her life. Her relationship with Sancho, whilst it leads to disappointment and betrayal, creates a spark of self-recognition. And her constant self-questioning is a form of work, of a kind of subjective effort to understand her life. And when she finally resolves to leave behind a dissatisfying life and seek sunlight and fresh air, she's beginning to engage in this process of becoming a subject, becoming a fully affirmed and fulfilled self. And so she carries out this process in response to Sancho as the catalyst. Rosa obviously has a clear understanding of being forced into a marriage that she doesn't want. And as a young woman, she resisted this idea of arranged marriage. But in spite of that, she is half-heartedly kind of reciting a lesson of patriarchal domination. And it's one that she knows very well. She doesn't really offer Vilma any sympathy, but instead a sort of disingenuous justification for a woman's duty to have children. So in spite of childhood traumas, or maybe because of them, Sylvestre and Rosa reinforce a kind of system of male domination. Sylvestre believes that the only way to make his father proud is to adopt a devout Hindu self, whilst Rosa claims to identify with the essentialized image of the mother, which is a way, it seems, of reducing the tension between seeking freedom and wanting it whilst feeling powerless. It's a way of pretending to herself that she has more freedom and power than she actually does, as if she's opting to be this mother. But however much she appears to be subsumed by patriarchal discourse and reinforces this system with her actions, she ultimately subverts the domination in her testimony. Because she speaks in first person, she expresses the truth of her pain, unhappiness in marriage, and the dissatisfaction in her relationship with Vilma. She also expresses hope in light of the truths that she's uncovered with the help of Sancho. She also expresses regret over how she's treated Mira, but offers a hopeful vision of their future. And she actually realizes that she needs to build a relationship with her daughter, that's not based on domination, but on understanding and forgiveness. Now, Mira, in many ways, is the true archetype of this crossing of the mangrove. So instead of relying on familiar paths, she resolves to travel on the paths of the world to gain access to unrevealed truths. Even though this would kind of be a retracing of those that Sancho has forged, these paths, she refuses to be identified as Sancho's widow, which would involve sort of resigning herself to a secondary role, remaining in the shadows mourning his loss. And she's already failed to escape her dissatisfaction in the ravine and can't be content remaining in this insular, polluted environment in Rivière-Rosselle. So Mira resolves to leave her loneliness and resentment behind and embarks on a difficult journey to know the man that she loved. And instead of playing the role as a kind of passive widow, she maps a new life for her and her future son. Her future does follow the paths forged by Sancho in order to understand him as the father of her child, Quentin. So her self-actualization is constructed from these reflections on her life and the sources of her dissatisfaction, and the way in which she's coped with her problems. She ruminates and thinks deeply about the obstacles that she stumbled into, the ravine that she goes to, the gullies, and Sancho have both betrayed her, and because of this she has to find a new route to happiness. But it is Sancho's life and his relationship with her, rather than his death, and this is how she's different from other characters, that provides the sort of raw material for this self-examination. Now, Xantippe, Emile and Joby, the male characters who seem to be capable of crossing the mangrove, are different. Emile Etienne doesn't embark on a voyage like the heroes of fiction that he admires. He's not, luckily, attempting to escape from slavery. His imagined journey, though, is an expression of freedom, a freedom to explore new lands and to explore himself, which would actually occur during his writing. So Emile's search is for intellectual freedom in his field of study, which is history. And even though he writes a history filled with very literal non-freedom, the slavery that has lasted for generations, he himself would be free. His opportunities as boundless as the expanse of fields upon which he would work, were he indentured slave. Lulu's son Joby subverts the male-dominated system his father espouses. He speaks in first person, offering his perspective, and he refuses to be spoken for. Like Sylvestre, he's made to feel ashamed for not behaving like a man when he's brought along to his stepmother's funeral. His stepmother's mother's funeral. He runs away from the coffin out of fear because he doesn't want to kiss the corpse. However, in the way that he contrasts with Sylvestre is that he doesn't want to please his father and compensate for the shame of having not been manly enough. He claims to hate him and doesn't want to follow in his footsteps and wishes to be disinherited. He identifies with his ancestor Gabriel, who married a black woman, causing him to be rejected by his family. Xantippe is ultimately a witness rather than an active hero who transforms the surroundings. And he's profoundly connected to those natural surroundings. So when he marries and builds a family with his wife, Gracieuse, Xanthippe plants roots and experiences a satisfying life. But this is all brutally destroyed when his family is killed in a fire on Christmas Day, which is presumably caused by jealous enemies. And through this victimization, he becomes exiled and becomes a kind of ghost, a kind of passive witness to the place and its history. He doesn't only represent this mythical past, but offers a vision of the present and the future that could move beyond revenge. Because revenge involves a reaction to a past injustice and is preoccupied with the past and is not then concerned with living in the present or creating a future. And Condé envisions writing about the present as an alternative to being preoccupied with a mythical, idealized past, emphasizing the importance of getting rid of old myths or else creating a new mythology based essentially on the lived reality of today. She maintains a focus on present circumstances that may be difficult to confront and as such must shine a harsh light on things, while upholding the conviction that we must approach the future differently.